Hi there, I'm Grace Lennox, 37. 2 weeks ago, I was pushed off a mountain, betrayed by my brother and my best friend. They staged my fall, called it an accident, and buried me with my legacy. But I survived. I crawled back through snow and silence, and yesterday I walked into my own memorial, looked them in the eye, and said, "You started without me." What came next? No one was ready for. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. After our mother died when I was 12, my world stopped running on childhood. Dad was too caught up trying to rebuild his life. And Damien, my half-brother, was just 7. I raised him. Every breakfast, every scraped knee, every parent-teacher conference. When I wasn't holding him together, I was holding the house together. That's how it's always been. Grace the fixer, Grace the strong one. Grace, who didn't ask for anything back. Callie came into the picture later, blonde, soft-spoken, smart in the kind of way that looked effortless. She and I were inseparable in high school. She once told me I was the only person who made her feel safe. I believed her. Years later, she married my brother. They said it was meant to be, the three of us becoming family. But sometimes meant-to-be things rot faster than accidents. When Dad passed, I took over his shares in the company, our company, and built it into something real. Lennox Studio became a name that mattered. Celebrity clients, feature spreads in design magazines, showrooms in 5 states. Meanwhile, Damien drifted from department to department, never staying long enough to understand one. And Callie, ever poised, ever polished, slipped into a role as our head of brand. Her idea, her image, our name. There were moments, little ones, where I felt like the air in the room shifted when I walked in. A look between them I wasn't meant to catch. Pauses that cut conversations short when I stepped too close. I used to tell myself I was imagining things, that I was tired, that people like us, family, don't betray each other. But sometimes silence screams louder than words. I remember one Thanksgiving 3 years ago. We were drinking wine in the sunroom. Damien had just stormed out after I shut down another one of his half-baked expansion proposals. Callie sat beside me, warm smile, gentle touch on my wrist. "You don't have to carry it all, you know," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost motherly. "Let someone else take the lead for once." I laughed. Thought she meant it kindly. Now I hear something else behind those words. I never talked about those moments with anyone. Not Nina, my oldest friend and legal advisor, who once warned me that Callie was too ambitious for someone who hadn't built anything herself. Not Julian, the one man who ever knew how tired I truly was before I pushed him away. Not even myself, not really. Because saying it aloud would make it real, and I wasn't ready to believe my family could turn on me. Still, I started building safeguards, quietly. I had Nina update the company bylaws. I asked for quarterly audits without telling Callie. I started keeping physical copies of key documents off-site. I told myself it was just good leadership, that I was protecting the company, but a part of me knew I was protecting myself. Damien always hated the spotlight, or maybe he hated that I stood in it. In every investor photo, he's one step behind me. In every article, my name gets top billing. It wasn't intentional. I offered him chances, real ones. But he wanted the title, not the work. He wanted the reward without the discipline. And the more I succeeded, the more he retreated behind quiet resentment and Callie's polished diplomacy. The truth is, I loved them. I still do, in that stubborn, aching way only family can manage. I thought if I gave enough, it would be enough. That loyalty was the same thing as love. That if I kept carrying them, eventually they'd see I was doing it for us. But I was wrong. I've always believed in the power of design, the idea that space can shape how we feel, who we become. Maybe that's why I poured so much of myself into building our company. It wasn't just a business. It was a way to craft beauty out of mess, to create control where there had been none. I didn't see the cracks forming beneath the paint. Or maybe I did, and I chose to ignore them, because sometimes hope looks a lot like denial. When Callie invited me back to Parksville for the 15-year anniversary celebration of Lennox Studio, she said the whole town would be there. "It's going to be beautiful," she promised, her voice glowing through the phone. Like old times. I hesitated. Seattle had been good for me. Space, silence, clean slates. but her voice held something I couldn't name. Urgency, maybe, or finality. Either way, I said yes. Because even now, even after everything, I still wanted to believe there was something left between us that wasn't strategy. That maybe this time, things really could feel like old times. But the thing about cracks is, they don't go away just because you paint over them. They wait. Until the wait is too much. And then they split everything wide open. I landed in Parksville on a Thursday afternoon. The kind of cold that seeps straight into your bones had already sunk its teeth into the town. It was the first snow of December, and the streets looked like they'd been dipped in sugar. The mountains beyond the rooftops stretched tall and watchful, as if they were keeping score of everything we tried to bury. Callie picked me up at the airstrip in a black SUV, her smile painted on like always. Her coat was cinched perfectly at the waist. Her gloves matched her scarf, and not a hair on her head dared to move. "You look rested," she said, as if that was the word people used for women who disappeared to rebuild themselves. I gave a short nod, watching the way her hands tightened briefly on the steering wheel before she turned the key and pulled away from the curb. The drive up the ridge was mostly silent. She talked about the anniversary party, how the board had insisted on something intimate, tasteful, how Damien had finally agreed to take on more public-facing work. I let her fill the space with curated sentences while I stared out at the snow-covered trees flashing by. Every word felt like it was being delivered to someone who hadn't known her for 20 years. When we reached the lodge, Damien was already waiting. He stood outside, arms folded across his chest, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. He didn't hug me, just said, "You made it," and turned to head inside. That was his way. Even as a kid, Damien always made you work for warmth. The plan, Callie explained over dinner, was to take a scenic flight at sunrise the next morning. "Just the three of us," she said. "Old times." Her voice dipped slightly when she said it, like she was trying to summon something real between us. I wanted to believe her. I really did. We ate by the fireplace, the dining room lit by the soft gold of hanging Edison bulbs, and the snap of logs behind the grate. Callie poured red wine like it was a ritual, careful not to spill a drop. Damien barely spoke, just watched the flames like they had something to say he couldn't. Later that night, I stepped onto the deck outside my room. The wind was sharp against my face, but I needed it. Needed the silence. Snowflakes caught in my lashes as I looked out over the dark forest below. I tried to remember the last time the three of us were alone without cameras, meetings, or board votes between us. It had to be years. When I came back inside, there was a note on my nightstand. It wasn't handwritten, just printed in neat serif font on thick paper. "You deserve tomorrow. Just breathe it in." See. It should have comforted me. Instead, it felt rehearsed. The next morning, we climbed into the helicopter just after dawn. The air was thin and sharp, the sky bleeding orange over the peaks. I watched the blades begin to spin, pulling up my collar against the wind. Damien adjusted my harness, fingers working with silent precision. 15 years, he said quietly. Feels like yesterday. But he didn't meet my eyes. Callie slid in beside me, her perfume sweet and suffocating. "Smile," she whispered, lifting her phone and angling the camera at us. I turned my face toward hers, forced a half smile as she leaned in too close. Her lips brushed my ear. "You still don't see it, do you?" she murmured. "You've always been in the way." Before the words even landed, her hand pressed against my shoulder. I caught the briefest glimpse of Damien, frozen, arms crossed again, watching, not stopping her, not moving at all. Then the world tilted. My scream was lost to the wind. My body hit the cold air like a slap. I saw the glint of her smile, just as the blades faded above me, the helicopter pulling away like nothing had happened. And then, there was only white. White sky, white snow, and the slow, certain weight of falling. I hit the snow hard. It wasn't graceful, and it wasn't quiet. The cold slapped the breath from my lungs, and something cracked. My leg, I think, or maybe my shoulder. For a moment, I didn't move. I couldn't. The sky above me was blinding, just endless white swallowing the rotor blades that were already pulling away, shrinking like a lie, disappearing into silence. When the pain came, it didn't knock. It slammed the door open and set fire to everything. I tried to scream, but all I could manage was a broken gasp. My right leg was twisted under me at an unnatural angle, and my arm hung limp, heavy like it didn't belong to me. But I was alive. That fact settled into me with terrifying clarity. I was alive, and they had left me here to die. I rolled slowly, biting down hard to keep from yelling. Each breath felt like I was breathing through shards of glass. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I didn't have time for panic. I didn't have time for grief. All I had was survival, and survival didn't leave room for self-pity. A thick pine branch stretched out low to the slope. I dragged myself toward it, my good arm scraping through the snow, pulling my body inch by inch. My fingers wrapped around the bark like it was the last honest thing I had left. I braced, gritted my teeth, and pulled. The world spun, but I held on. Pain screamed through my shoulder as something shifted deep inside it. Bone or tendon, I didn't know. I didn't care. I was still breathing. It took half an hour to drag myself to the line of trees. Every move was a negotiation with my body. Give me this, and I'll give you breath. One step, one crawl, one fight at a time. The cold bit deeper, creeping through the layers like it knew what it was doing. But it also kept the bleeding slow. Silver linings. That's what they teach you when you build anything from nothing. By some miracle, I found it. A cabin. Small, old, probably forgotten by the hunters who once used it. The porch sagged and the windows were crusted with frost, but it stood like a whisper of shelter in a world that had turned its back. I reached the door, leaned against it, and pounded my fist once, twice. Nothing. I tried the knob. Unlocked. Inside, it smelled of old smoke, mildew, and something sour. But it was warmer than the outside, and the door still closed behind me. I collapsed onto the wooden floor, shaking, my blood staining the planks beneath me. My breath was loud in the quiet, raspy and raw, but it was still there. Still mine. In the corner, a rusted wood stove. Nearby, a shelf with a dented first aid tin and a stack of scratchy gray blankets. I crawled to it, fingers numb but determined. I ripped open the tin, spilling gauze, tape, and half-used antiseptic. I worked slowly, wrapping my leg first, improvising a splint with an old chair leg and a belt I cut from the wall hook. My shoulder I could do nothing for, not yet. It hung there, bruised and ruined, but still part of me. I leaned back, letting the weight of it all wash over me. In the dim light of that cabin, something sharp and unrelenting settled in my chest. Not rage, not sadness, just clarity. They hadn't made a mistake. This wasn't a tragic misstep in a snowstorm. Callie had whispered in my ear. Damien had watched, and no one had come back. A crackle broke the silence. I turned, startled, toward a small radio sitting dusty on the shelf. The red power light blinked faintly. I reached for it, adjusted the dial with frozen fingers. Static hissed. Then a voice pushed through. Local businesswoman Grace Lennox presumed lost. Search has been suspended due to worsening weather. Community gathering to be held this Sunday to honor her life and legacy. I stared at the radio, unmoving. They had already buried me. I was a ghost before my body had even cooled. And just like that, my name became a headline. A tragedy to leverage, a legacy to inherit. I whispered aloud, voice hoarse and shaking. They really did it. I looked around that cabin, at the crooked walls, the torn curtains, the silence that had cradled my breath. Then I said it again, louder. Not in disbelief this time, but as a promise. They think I'm dead. I reached for the old ranger's coat hanging near the door, its canvas stiff with age but thick. I put it on like armor. It smelled of smoke and pine, the kind of smell that reminded you someone had survived here before. I wasn't going to die in this place, not like this. Not for them. 2 days. That's how long it took me to crawl back to the world that had already buried me. 2 days dragging a broken leg and a ruined shoulder through frozen woods and silence thick enough to choke on. Every breath was a bargain. Every step, a war. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just moved. I followed the creek south. My father taught me that when I was a kid. Follow water if you're lost. I don't think he imagined it'd be used like this. When I finally saw the road through the trees, I laughed. Not from joy, from disbelief, because part of me didn't think I'd actually make it. The world was still going, and I was still breathing. A woman named Miss Thaya found me limping near the edge of her snow-covered property. She was in her 70s, dressed in a pink fleece and slippers, watering dead flowers on her porch like it was summer. "Lord Jesus," she whispered when she saw me, "you look like a ghost." I didn't answer. I just collapsed at her feet. She let me shower. She made me tea. She didn't ask questions that needed answers. She gave me her late husband's coat and a pair of boots that didn't fit. When I asked where the funeral was, she didn't flinch. "Downtown," she said. "The old chapel off Parker Street. Everyone's already there." Everyone. I walked slow. Not from fear, but because every step reminded me I was still standing. The town looked the same. Parksville never really changed. People waved, not recognizing me. Or maybe they did and didn't believe their eyes. Maybe grief makes people see what they want to see. I reached the chapel as the service was halfway through. The parking lot was full. Cameras lined the sidewalk. A local reporter was speaking into a mic, words I didn't catch. I moved past her. My boots thudded against stone as I climbed the steps. The doors opened without protest. The warmth inside hit me like betrayal. Callie stood at the front in black silk, speaking into a microphone. Her voice cracked with just the right emotion. "Grace was strong," she said, hand on her chest. "But even strength has limits." She turned slightly, brushing away a tear that never actually fell. "She gave everything to this company, to this family. I only hope we can carry on in her name." Beside her, Damien looked down at the floor, jaw tight, a crease between his brows like he was concentrating on his own sadness. His arm was around her waist. The gesture was soft, familiar, public. I stepped into the aisle and started walking. Gasps rippled like wind through wheat. People stood, phones raised, flashbulbs popped. I didn't stop, I didn't flinch. I walked until I was close enough to see Callie's pupils shrink. For a split second, her expression didn't move. Then she blinked, stumbled back, and whispered, "Oh my God." Damien turned, face slack. "Grace," my voice cut through the silence like a blade. "I see you started without me." A wave of murmurs, chairs creaked. An old friend from the board reached for his heart. Someone dropped their coffee. I kept my gaze on the two people who left me for dead. "Sorry I'm late," I said. "I had trouble getting down the mountain." Callie recovered quickly. Her hand clutched her chest. "You're alive. We thought, God, we thought." Her words cracked in all the right places. "Where have you been? Are you okay? Damien, get her a chair." "Don't," I said. "Don't pretend." She froze. My eyes scanned the crowd. Faces I knew. Faces that had mourned me. Faces that had benefited from my absence. "You all came to honor my life," I said. "But here's the thing. I never gave it to you." Cameras were everywhere now, reporters shouting questions. A security guard stepped forward, unsure who to escort out. No one expected the dead to need protection. Callie's voice turned low, urgent. "Grace, we don't know what happened to you. We thought you fell. It was an accident. You weren't well, remember? You were paranoid before the trip. You said people were watching you." There it was, the narrative. "I wasn't paranoid," I said. "I was right." I turned to the crowd. "They pushed me," I said. Voice calm. "Callie pushed me." Damien stood there and watched. Then they flew away and filed a death report before my body got cold. A beat. Then another. The silence held for a second too long. Callie shook her head. "She's confused. Clearly something happened to her out there. Trauma. She needs help." "I needed help," I said, when I was hanging off a branch with a dislocated shoulder, wondering if my brother ever loved me. Damien opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked down again, just like before. I turned, walking slowly back up the aisle. Flashbulbs followed me like shadows. At the door, I paused. "They tried to erase me," I said. "But I'm not gone. And I'm not finished." I stepped into the cold again, back into the town that thought it buried me. Let them stare. Let them whisper. Let them wonder what happens when the woman they left behind decides she's not done. The morning after the funeral, The snow had turned to sleet. I sat in Nina Cortez's kitchen, wrapped in a borrowed flannel and a silence neither of us was eager to break. She poured coffee like she always did. Strong, no sugar, no nonsense. Nina had once been my closest confidant, until she walked out of Lennox's studio after clashing with Callie on a deal she called ethically offensive. I should have listened harder. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Because once we open this door, it doesn't close quietly." I opened the folder without answering. The first page hit me like a fist. A life insurance policy, $10 million, issued 2 months ago. Beneficiary, Damian Lennox. Contingency, if Grace Lennox is declared dead under accidental circumstances, immediate payout. I turned the page. There was my signature. Except it wasn't. The curve of the G was wrong. The tail of the X too clean. It looked like mine, but it wasn't mine. "I ran it through a forensic check," Nina said. "It's a forgery. Clean enough to fool an adjuster, but not the feds." My pulse stayed even. My hands didn't shake. But the heat under my skin started to rise. How the hell did they pull this off? Nina pulled out her laptop, opened a chain of emails she'd been monitoring since she left the company. "There's more. A real estate transfer last week. They used your signature to reassign the main showroom lease. Ownership now sits under a shell company. Callie's name doesn't show up, but this guy." She turned the screen. A name, a man I didn't recognize. But the email trail told a different story. One thread in particular froze me. "If anything happens to her, make sure the funds move before probate. Time is critical." "See. They planned it," I said, not even realizing I'd spoken aloud. Nina nodded. "Yeah, they did." I sat back. The dots were no longer dots. They were forming something darker. The fake signature, the fast funeral, the performance. They were cleaning up, making it official, turning me into a ghost on paper so they could cash in before the ink dried. "How long do I have before they start liquidating assets?" I asked. "Depends," she said. "But if I were you, I'd assume they've already started." We spent the next hour digging. Every click unearthed another piece. Bank accounts moved into joint control. A statement of mental concern filed with the company's HR just 2 weeks before the trip. Callie had laid the groundwork. Carefully, legally, quietly. I stared at the screen, watching my name dissolve from ownership to memory. "She was always 5 moves ahead," I said. "I just didn't know I was the game." Nina sat back, arms folded. "You want revenge, or do you want your life back?" "I want both." That night, I broke into my old office. The building was quiet, the lobby light left on for show. My old keycard still worked, sloppy on their part. Upstairs, the executive floor looked untouched. Like I'd never left. Like I hadn't been erased. Inside my office, the air smelled like cedar and betrayal. I opened the file cabinet Callie never knew I kept locked. Inside, backups, old hard drives, copies of contracts, handwritten notes. The kind of analog paranoia that had once annoyed my assistants. Now, it might save me. I stuffed everything into a duffel and left the way I came in. Quiet, unseen, unfinished. Back at Nina's, I collapsed onto her couch, the weight of the day pressing deep into my ribs. She brought a blanket but didn't say a word. She knew. Before I closed my eyes, I whispered, "It wasn't an accident, and in the morning I'd prove it." Some truths don't knock. They show up on your doorstep, soaking wet and worn down, like they've run out of places to hide. Julian Locke did exactly that. 3 days after the funeral, just after dawn. Standing on Nina's porch with snow in his lashes and a folder clutched in his hand like it was keeping him upright. I opened the door, and neither of us said anything at first. He looked older than I remembered, hollowed out. But when his eyes met mine, I didn't see guilt. I saw recognition. The kind that only comes when someone's seen the same fire up close. "You're supposed to be dead," he said, quiet like he didn't want to wake the house. I didn't blink. I get that a lot lately. Inside, we sat across from each other at Nina's kitchen table. Nina stayed out of it. She knew when a conversation didn't need a witness. The silence between us was sharp. I stirred my coffee, even though I wasn't planning to drink it. Julian finally slid the folder across the table without a word. Inside were documents, transaction records, company memos, names I recognized, and numbers that didn't belong where they were. Transfers from Lennox Studio accounts to shell corporations, backdated authorizations, off-record meetings. I traced my finger along one line and looked up. "You've been holding this," I said. He didn't deny it. I tried to publish it. No one would touch it. Every editor passed. Some stopped returning my calls. Parksville's reach is longer than you think. "Callie?" He hesitated. Just for a second, but it was enough. "I didn't know what she was planning," he said. When she and I were involved, it was brief. After you and I ended, I was angry. She was calculated. I thought it was nothing." "But it wasn't nothing," I said flatly. "It gave her access." Julian's jaw tightened. "Yes, it did." The flash of betrayal didn't sting the way I thought it would. Not after everything else. It wasn't personal anymore. It was strategic. A weapon she used like all the others. I flipped through the pages again and paused at one that caught my eye. Rosethorn Partners, LLC. A name I hadn't seen in years. We'd used it in the early days for legal shielding, long dissolved, or so I thought. "That account was closed," I said. Julian leaned forward. "Not exactly. Damien reopened it. Quietly. He's been funneling funds into it for over a year. Look at the routing paths. Nevada, then Cayman. He's getting ready to disappear." I stared at the numbers, feeling the floor shift beneath me. Callie had built the narrative, but Damien was making the escape plan. He was always quiet, always in the background. Maybe that's how he got away with so much. "We have bank records," I asked. "We do now," he said. "And this guy, Ruben Stahl, he's the one moving the money, hedge fund guy. Reputation for dark work under boutique portfolios. Keeps it clean on the books, dirty underneath." "How do you know?" "Because I followed him," Julian said. "Last night, Brigham Hotel downtown. Damien met with him just before the service. We drove that evening. The streets were slick with melt, the town glowing like nothing had fractured underneath. Outside the hotel, we waited in Julian's truck, engine low. Around 9, a man in a dark coat and gloves stepped out of the elevator, briefcase in hand. Julian snapped pictures, face, plates, timestamps. When Stahl drove off, we followed him for 6 blocks before letting him go. Back at Nina's, we laid it all out. Timelines, connections, photos, proof. I stood over the table, staring at the mess my name had been dragged into, and asked the question that had been pressing behind every word. "Why are you helping me now?" Julian didn't look up at first. "Because I didn't stop it when I could have. Because I let my pride ruin something good. And because this time, I'm choosing the right side of the story." I nodded once, slow. I didn't forgive him, but I didn't need to. I needed something else. "Then let's finish this," I said. "Let's bring them both down." The deeper I dug, the more everything about Callie and Damien reeked of structure, like betrayal had been drafted in phases. Their plan wasn't impulsive. It was practiced. The fake insurance, the ghost accounts, the forged leases. Each piece had been laid carefully, and now I needed the one thing that would make the rest collapse. Proof they were rewriting me as unstable. Not just to the media, internally, where it counted most. And I knew exactly where that paper trail would lead. Back into the office they'd stolen from me. At 2:13 a.m., I slipped into Lennox Studio headquarters for the first time since the funeral. The place looked polished, sanitized. The lobby lights glowed like nothing had ever fractured. Like the woman they were mourning last week hadn't built this company from a fold-out drafting table and second-hand fabric. I used the freight entrance, just like we used to when inventory came in late, and climbed the back stairwell. My key card, long disabled, was useless, but Nina had already helped me copy a master key from an old janitor badge. It slid in clean. The lock clicked. My name was still etched into the doorframe, a lie carved in brass. The office was still. Too clean. The kind of clean you only get when someone's trying to erase a scent. My desk had been emptied, files removed, and the bookshelves restaged. But behind the lower cabinet, they hadn't found the sealed drive I'd bolted behind the panel when we started onboarding international investors. I pulled it out, slipped it into my coat, then caught sight of a white folder labeled in tight, slanted script, L. Grace, Legal HR Notes. It was left in plain sight. Either arrogance or bait. I opened it. Inside were internal memos, performance reviews I'd never seen, and a psychiatric assessment filed under company medical review. Diagnosis: manic symptoms, elevated suspicion, signs of deteriorating executive function, signed by Dr. Nolan Kent. A name I had never spoken, never consented to, never met. There it was, the narrative, pre-written, neatly documented, ready for the day I no longer played along. I left through the alley, not looking back. But I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the only person who might still have a memory of me untainted, Frank Mathers. He'd worked for my father before Lennox Studio ever opened its first showroom. My childhood was wrapped around his voice, reading maintenance reports while I sketched on blueprint paper. He was family, or at least, he used to be. I parked across from his house just before sunrise. Wind scraped across the windshield as I knocked on the door. Frank opened slowly, a flashlight in one hand and sleep still in his eyes. When he saw me, he froze. "Grace," he whispered, like saying my name might make me vanish again. "They told me." "They told you I lost it," I said. "That I imagined things, that I was unstable. That's why I'm here." Inside, the house smelled like cedar and dust. He poured coffee with shaking hands. The silence between us felt familiar, not warm but worn. Frank sat down across from me, and when he finally spoke, it wasn't defensive, it was regret. "They said you were spiraling," he admitted. "Callie showed me papers, said you were acting paranoid. Damien said he was worried about you. He asked if I'd ever seen signs of decline. I didn't know what to say." "But you didn't stop them," I said. His shoulders sagged. I didn't know how. I reached into my coat and slid the assessment across the table. "They had a doctor sign off on a diagnosis I never heard of. They forged records, and they used your silence to make it real." Frank ran a hand over his face. For a moment, I saw the man who used to call me kiddo when I snuck into meetings. "What do you need from me?" "Your memory," I said. "The truth. If I can show they manipulated the internal vote, the board will have no choice but to reopen the executive claims. I need you to say what you saw, what you didn't." Frank looked me in the eye and gave a single nod. "They never should have crossed you." Back at Nina's, I plugged the old drive into her laptop. It opened slowly, folders loading like ghosts, and buried deep inside one labeled Compliance Archive, I found what I had been praying for, an audio file, a recorded call. I clicked play. Callie's voice slid through the speakers, clear and cold. "Grace is losing control. The board needs to think about long-term sustainability. If we don't make a shift now, she'll take this whole place down with her." There it was, the setup, the lie, the motive dressed as concern. And for the first time, I knew exactly what I had to do next. Julian and I didn't speak much on the drive to the studio. The snow had hardened into sleet again, making every intersection feel like a gamble. But I needed the cold. It focused me. My fingers were wrapped around a flash drive, like it was a detonator, and in a way, it was. Callie had crafted an image for 15 years. This morning, I would burn it down. We pulled into the lot just after 8. A local reporter was already waiting on the sidewalk. I looked at Julian. He nodded once, then disappeared into the crowd with his camera. He knew the rhythm of exposure better than anyone. The lobby was quiet until I stepped inside. Then it rippled, like a dropped stone. Some employees gasped. Others froze. One assistant dropped her coffee. I didn't stop. I walked through like I still belonged, because I did. Upstairs, the boardroom doors were already open, Callie standing front and center like it was her stage. She wore cream silk and a smile sharp enough to cut rope. Damien sat at the table, eyes flicking between me and the floor. The rest of the board shuffled awkwardly, unsure whether to stand or run. "I called this meeting," I said, setting the speaker on the table, "so everyone can hear exactly what you've all been celebrating." I pressed play. The recording filled the room. Callie's voice, clear as glass, saying, "Grace is losing control. She'll take the whole place down with her." No one moved. The clip ended with a soft laugh. Hers. A sound I used to think meant comfort. Now I knew better. Callie stepped forward, all performance. "That's completely out of context," she said, palms open. "That was a private meeting. You stole company property." Her voice quivered, not from fear, but calculation. She looked at the others. We were trying to protect the company. You all know what she's been like lately. She looked at me, voice dropping. We thought you were dead, Grace. No, I said calmly. You hoped I was. And when I wasn't, you scrambled. I turned to the board. There are forged signatures, fraudulent lease transfers, medical records signed by a doctor I've never met. And this, I held up the flash drive, is just the start. I nodded to Julian, who stepped forward and connected his laptop to the screen. The boardroom lights dimmed. A video played, Callie, in a private party, holding a glass of champagne. Her voice loud over music. She'll never see it coming. One push, and it's over. Laughter followed. Someone's toast clinked in the background. Where did that footage come from? One of the board members asked, face pale. Is this real? Callie's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Damien stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. I didn't know she recorded that, he said, voice cracking. I didn't agree to any of this. He looked at me like I was the storm and the shelter all at once. I didn't know she was going to. I didn't think she'd actually. He trailed off. Julian hit pause. We also have footage of Callie signing legal documents under a false name at a bank in Salt Lake. 2 weeks ago, we've already submitted it to the authorities. Forgery, fraud, and intent to defraud a federal insurance policy. The room erupted. Board members talking over each other. Someone swore. One woman grabbed her phone and stepped out. I stood still, arms folded, letting the chaos swirl around me like wind. Callie turned to me, eyes sharp, venom finally replacing performance. You think this makes you a hero? You think you win because you survived? Her voice was low, dangerous. You were always too proud to ask for help, too arrogant to see you weren't indispensable. She took a step closer. You'll never have what I have. You'll never be who I am. I didn't blink. You're right, I said. I built something. You built a version of me that made you feel safer, but the real version doesn't stay dead. She climbs back down the mountain. I turned to the board. Effective immediately, I request an emergency vote to nullify the legal succession made under false pretense, pending full investigation. Nina entered the room just then, papers in hand. Already drafted, she said. The vote was called. Unanimous. Callie tried to speak again, but the security officer, this time the real kind, not the ones paid to look the other way, stepped forward. Ma'am, you're under investigation. Please come with us. Her hands trembled as she turned toward Damien, silently pleading, but he didn't move, not even an inch. Her heels echoed against the floor as they led her out. When the doors closed, the silence that followed didn't feel victorious, just clean, like something long infected had finally been cut away. I looked at Damien. You still have a choice, I said. Tell the truth. Start over or follow her. His face crumpled like a paper mask, and he sank into the chair, silent. I left him there. Downstairs, the press waited. I stepped in front of the cameras, not with a prepared speech, but with the kind of clarity that doesn't require rehearsal. My name is Grace Lennox, I said. I founded this company. I was pushed off a mountain by the people closest to me. I survived. And now, the truth survives with me. The questions came fast, but I didn't stay. I said what needed to be said. The rest could wait. Back at Nina's, I sat in her kitchen, the same way I had when this all started. But this time, I wasn't shaking. This time, I was steady. I looked at her and said, We're not done yet. And she smiled. Not the polite kind. The kind that meant something real was finally beginning. The fire had burned. Now it was time to rebuild from ash, on my own terms. The courthouse smelled like dust and old air, like everything inside had been waiting too long to matter again. I sat still on the wooden bench outside the hearing room, watching Callie through the glass as she fidgeted with her cuffs. Her lawyer whispered something sharp in her ear, but she didn't look away from the floor. For once there was no perfect hair, no curated expressions, just a woman stripped down to the choices she thought would stay hidden. Inside the room, the evidence lined up clean and brutal. Nina presented the forged documents, the voice recordings, the video of Callie at the bank signing under my name. No one interrupted. Even Damien didn't try to defend her. He sat beside his lawyer, silent, eyes hollow. I watched him closely. His hands shook just once, when the clerk played the clip of Callie laughing about my fall. The sound of her voice, gleeful and casual, hung in the room like a wound. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I told the panel what happened on that mountain. The push, the silence, the way they left me. I told them about the insurance, the shell companies, the diagnosis I never received. And then I told them what mattered more than any of that. I survived. Not just the fall, but the narrative they tried to trap me in. I watched the jurors' eyes shift, something inside them recalibrating. The verdict came fast. Callie was remanded without bail, pending federal fraud charges. Damien's face collapsed when his plea deal was read aloud. No jail time, but full asset forfeiture and disqualification from any future corporate leadership. He didn't speak, just nodded once, like it was all he had left. As the bailiff led Callie away, she turned back to me for a fraction of a second. Her mouth twitched, not in apology, but disbelief. She had truly thought I wouldn't fight back. I didn't go back to Lennox Studio after the trial. I declined the board's offer to resume the CEO position. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. That chapter was over. Instead, I filed the paperwork to start something new. The Lennox Collective, a design center for single mothers, women re-entering the workforce, and survivors rebuilding from nothing. I found a worn-down factory space off Main Street and bought it outright. The walls were cracked, the wiring shot, but it had windows tall enough to catch the morning light. That was enough. The first week, no one came. The second week, 3 women showed up, 2 with children in tow, 1 too scared to speak. We laid out second-hand fabric rolls on folding tables, traced lines in silence, and stitched until our fingers ached. On Friday, a girl named Alina, no older than 10, handed me something wrapped in newspaper. Inside was a small house carved from scrap wood, crooked and beautiful. "It's for you," she said, "because you built something from nothing." I keep that little wooden house on my desk now. It reminds me that the most solid things aren't always symmetrical. They're held together by hands that refuse to give up. At night, when the studio's quiet, I run my thumb along the rough edges and think about the people who tried to bury me. How their silence used to weigh more than their words. Not anymore. Their shadows don't reach me here. Sometimes I still wake up hearing snowfall. The body remembers impact. The cold, the silence, the fight for breath. But I don't flinch. I breathe through it. I remind myself that healing isn't linear. It's jagged, like the mountain that nearly ended me. And every time I stand in that studio, surrounded by blueprints and beginners, I know I chose right. Not just survival, but purpose. Julian visits sometimes. He never stays long. We don't talk about the past, not directly, but there's something quieter between us now. A kind of knowing. He brings donated supplies, helps fix busted lights, reads architectural history books to the girls who ask. One afternoon, he handed me a folder of scholarship applications, design schools offering full rides. "For when they're ready," he said. I nodded. Neither of us said thank you. We didn't need to. Rebuilding isn't flashy. It's slow. It's daily. And it's mine. There's no plaque with my name, no spotlight. Just chipped tiles, paint-stained boots, and the sound of laughter spilling through cracked windows. People call me a survivor. I don't correct them. But surviving was just the beginning. Now I get to build the rest. The light on the camera blinked red. I sat still, shoulders squared, hands folded on the desk, waiting for the silence to settle. Then I looked straight into the lens. No makeup, no polish, just me. "My name is Grace Lennox," I began, my voice low but clear. "And this is not the story you thought it was." The room behind me was bare, just a wooden table, a model house carved from pine sitting beside a chipped ceramic mug. It was intentional. I wasn't here to sell anything. I was here to tell the truth. I talked about the snow, the fall, the pain. I didn't soften the words or dress them up. I didn't need to. "They left me there," I said. "My own family. People I built everything with. People I trusted." I let the words land, then paused. But this isn't a story about what they did. It's about what I did after. My fingers brushed the edge of the wooden model, and I let the silence hang just long enough for the weight to shift from victim to survivor. I described the climb back, how survival wasn't just about staying alive, but about choosing not to disappear. "They wrote me out of my own legacy," I said. They filed paperwork, held services, gave statements. They called me unstable, unfit, gone. A slight shake of the head, not from sadness but from clarity. But I'm here, and they were wrong. I leaned forward, closer to the lens. This face, this voice, this body, bruised but not broken. It belongs to me. And I'm taking it back. Somewhere in the background, a heater clicked. I ignored it. The thing is, I continued, you don't have to vanish just because someone else benefits from your silence. You don't have to hand over your name, your story, your power, just because it makes others more comfortable. My tone didn't rise, but sharpened. I've learned that surviving betrayal doesn't end when the courtroom does. It ends when you decide to rewrite the story. I let that linger, then I gave it a shape. I told them about the center, how it wasn't about interiors or profit margins anymore, how it was a place where women, especially women starting over, could learn to build, create, and claim space again. We teach design, I said, but more than that, we teach ownership, not just of projects, but of self. I mentioned the girl who brought me the crooked wooden house, how it didn't need to be perfect to be powerful. She said it looked like something new. I think she was right. Near the end, I picked up the small house and held it in my hands. If you've ever felt erased, I said quietly, if you've ever been told your version of the truth is too loud, too complicated, too much, remember this. I looked into the lens again, steady. You are not too much. You are not a mistake. And your story isn't over, unless you decide to stop writing it. I could feel my chest rising and falling slower now, like the weight was finally shifting from beneath my ribs. I set the house back down, leaned back, and closed with a line I hadn't rehearsed. If you've been cut out of your own life, I said, write yourself back in, loudly, unapologetically, like I did. Then I reached forward and turned off the camera,